Hello, hi. This is our webinar session on how to develop your 2025 talent roadmap.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fast approaching.
yeah,
It's like, what is it? It's like 46 business days in UK and Europe
yes,
until Christmas,
yeah,
which means that,
scary.
yeah, everything's moving quite quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
don't
so
know
I,
where it's
I,
gone.
yeah, I think this is probably quite a timely one, to be honest. Um,
Absolutely.
I know that I've spoken to quite a lot of clients, both small companies, both large companies as well, in terms of what those talent roadmaps need to look like for 2025 and how to structure them. And it still surprises me a little bit to this day in terms of some of the simple things that people miss out on.
Mm.
Um, I guess before we jump in, should we do a little bit of an introduction just in case there is anybody new that's joining for this webinar?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is my second webinar. Happy to be back. Glad that the feedback was good that, wanted to get me back on. I'm the client services manager here, or consultant here. Basically, I'm at the moment working quite a lot with the larger pharma companies to establish, better relationships. And I'm also working alongside of them to ensure that their processes are as best as they can be and as effective as they can be. So yeah, that's a bit about me. What about
Nice.
you?
Yeah, obviously, hi, Jacob. I am the global director. My experience covers building and setting roadmaps, funnily enough, for cell and gene therapy companies over in the US, specifically for venture capital and private equity firms. But yeah, 6 years of doing this now, so I'm feeling a little bit more like a dinosaur when it
Yeah.
comes to it. But hey, 2025 looks like it's going to be an exciting one.
Mm.
And I think from conferences we've been to, discussions that we've had, there's a lot of excitement about the amount of investment that's going to go into next year. I think we're going to see a lot more companies on the market, which would be exciting, a lot more mergers and acquisitions, which all in all kind of creates a little bit more of a supply versus demand question mark when it comes to bringing in the right people at the right time, what the strategies look like, hence how important is it to put a roadmap in place for
Absolutely.
2025.
And you can feel it as well with our current clients that we're working with. The volume of roles and vacancies becoming available are slowly increasing, and there's a lot more need for really setting your stall out for 2025, because from what we're seeing at the moment, especially over the last month or two, it's going to be quite busy, and a lot of movement. So you need to be prepared, I think, is the overall sort of focus of this session. Yeah, where would you like to start, JP?
I think, to be honest, it's probably looking at, um, let's look at the negative parts for not necessarily having a roadmap in place. At kind of what happens if you don't have something. What are some of the negatives? So I guess working with some of the farmers yourself,
Yeah,
how have you seen kind of the negative parts of not having a roadmap in place for the time being?
absolutely. I think one of the key things that I'm seeing at the moment is that reactivity. The TA and HR departments, whoever's doing your hiring, is having to be quite reactive for those roles that are popping up and that need filling now with an immediate need. And as we know, it could be quite difficult, especially for a permanent hire, for that immediacy to be fulfilled. And I think keeping reactive is something that, may make their hiring process lengthier or not as good of a experience for the candidates. Going back to our previous session, it all affects everything. So staying as prepared as possible and not being as reactive to things is really important. That's something that I'm seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I think with, again, looking at this year with those companies that maybe weren't as prepared for 2024 when it came to the right strategies and what the roadmap looked like, whether it be backfills for positions, whether it be key growth areas on the basis of potential clinical data that's been released. I think for them, that kind of reactiveness has actually meant that they've rushed a process, maybe cut corners on what their normal process would look like, but they've potentially not found the right person.
Yeah.
And they've just plugged the gap for the time being, which actually creates a bit more of an issue in the long run, especially if they're not culturally aligned or are taking the job, for example, because they just need a job at that point of time. And when the market picks up, those are the people that you might need to rely on, but can't necessarily rely on.
You don't want that flight risk.
No, and it's tough, especially in this market. And I think when, there's new generations coming into different roles as well, I think especially with the younger generations, it's quite easy for them to see that actually in order to make progress within a business, I might need to make a jump in order to do that. And actually, I don't care whether I've been there less than a year. If it feels right for me, it feels right for me. So there's a lot, and putting in the right type of roadmap and planning for A, B, and C, I think really helps to solidify what that strategy looks like, and hopefully mean that you don't hire the wrong people at the wrong time.
Having those contingencies in place as well is really important, because you try as hard as you can to strategize and plan. Some things might not work out the way you expect them to, so you've got to have an option B or option C in place. So it's really important just to take all of that into consideration as well. I think another main issue is this is less on, when you're deciding your strategy. This is more on the business itself. I think it's really important to have that open communication with the hiring managers, the TA team, the HR team, all of those functions that are involved in hiring for that business. Having that open communication is so crucial. And I think it's a really big potential negative that I see a lot in companies, is that transparency is not there. I don't know if you found the same thing.
Yeah, just straight up. Yeah. I think, the major issue that a lot of companies face, because they don't have that alignment, is that, HR talent acquisition, there are some incredible people out in the market that are very good at what they do. But there's a lot of people who might be really good in terms of cultural and the processes in getting people through the door, but there's misalignment when it comes to those technical skill sets, or each hiring manager has a different set of skills that they're looking for, both in terms of personality, in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis, how they interact. And unless you have that clarity and that clear line of communication from whoever's at the kind of front and then behind the scenes, then you're going to really struggle and really misalign. And that leads to, going back to other sessions, in terms of, poor quality of candidates. It looks at poor kind of reputation on the market for being able to bring people forward but not take them through. And when there's limited amount of people in this space in certain areas, you don't want to have that negative connotation with your company because of misalignment, because you don't have clear lines of communication.
Absolutely.
And it is so tough. I think, especially from my experience with the smaller companies, a little bit easier because you're able to have that communication. But as companies start to get bigger and bigger, it's a lot harder. And unless hiring managers understand that hiring is a really important part of their job and a necessity, and they don't have those clear lines of communication, they're going to really struggle with progressing in the business and growing that business and making sure that it's more effective. Building a business from 5 to 10, easy. Building a business from 10 to 50, really difficult, because you're not experienced at that. So changing strategies, having clear communication, there's a lot to think about.
Yeah. And I think even in the smaller companies, being very diligent in terms of keeping that communication channel open, even if there are only 3 people who are really involved, you need to keep everyone in the loop. Say if you're trying to hire a contractor in Europe and it's going to be inside or outside IR35, you need that from the beginning, not, you need to ensure that you don't lose the communication along the way and everyone's looped in, so that, say, if you are involving an agency like ourselves, that you can pass that communication on to us as well.
With your experience with the pharma side and the larger companies, how have they been able to extract that information from leadership in terms of creating that strategy, understanding what the talent roadmap looks like moving forward, what the hires they need in Q2 are compared to what they need in Q3?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually from my experience, this is a bit shocking. So a lot of big pharmas will have dedicated teams within their TA teams for specific departments or specific countries. So it's clear that they have the overview in terms of who their hiring managers are that they will be supporting throughout the year or doing searches for throughout the year. But they don't have those monthly or, you know, bi-weekly catch-ups with those hiring managers. I understand that, you know, hiring isn't the hiring manager's only job, but a 5-minute just to get a rundown on how their team's going or what they're seeing in terms of workload, and, you know, if there's any need for additional hands so that they can mod the budget that way or something like that doesn't happen. So I think in terms of keeping the communication with hiring managers and TA really clear, you need to ensure that you're having regular catch-ups with your hiring managers. Equally, I think it could be quite good for the hiring managers to take some initiative to reach out to the TA team as well to establish those catch-ups, which I don't hear of very often. And a lot of people in TA have said that they've never had their hiring manager come to them. They have to go to them themselves. I think, you know, as long as it's honest and open, you know, whether it's something as simple as using an email, just sending a quick email off helps create that workflow and makes it more efficient in the long run. What about you? What do you think is really important when it comes to communication?
We spoke about this beforehand. But buddy systems is what we used to kind of implement with some of the mid-sized biotech companies that we were working with. So if you had a larger talent acquisition or HR team, you'd buddy them up with certain teams. So it might be a case that actually you've got someone just focusing on tech ops. Great. How are we buddying them up individually with those hiring managers? I think something that I saw that was really effective, it was for a company over in San Francisco in the Bay Area when it went through kind of like a massive growth phase. And what they used to do was they'd have the buddy system in place, but they'd make sure that they did a bit like a lunch and learn session, but once a month, every single month, it would be like a kind of a date night type of idea. They'd take the hiring manager out and they'd go for lunch outside of the office. So it meant they kind of took them out of their comfort zone to an extent, but they took them away from everything that would be distracting them during the meeting. No laptops, nothing like that. And they'd go and they'd sit down and they'd just run through what the strategy was looking like, where they need to kind of improve on. And it helped to kind of create more of a collaborative environment. It helped to create a really positive relationship between talent acquisition and the hiring manager. But actually, by being taken outside of the comfort zone into, or should I say, outside of the work environment, they started to understand each other and understand kind of what the hiring manager might be looking for from time to time, how the TA might be screening candidates. And it was interesting, their kind of like hit rate in terms of quality of candidates increased, which meant that they didn't have to screen as many, which meant that the hiring manager was happy because he had less time speaking with people that weren't correct. And the TA was happy because she was getting a high hit rate and knew exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea to implement, especially if you're a head of TA or a lead function and you're really struggling to get your team and the hiring managers to work together. That's a really good implementation. Also, it sounds quite enjoyable as well.
Yeah, it was. it helped to create, I guess, a collaborative environment. And I'm conscious, you know, that not everyone has the budget at the moment to be able to say, yeah, go and spend, you know, 25, 50, 100 euros on lunch, for example.
How much it might be.
But go for a walk, grab a coffee, try and understand that person a little bit deeper. And that 1 hour every month actually can really, really help to enhance the collaboration.
I think in the larger companies where they are using maybe more of a system where they put in, like the hiring manager would put in a request for a specific vacancy and then it would filter through TA and get allocated to maybe someone they've not worked before. Having something like that in place would be really great in terms of keeping the communication open. And also you can then strategize together while you're out on your walk or having your lunch, can't you?
Yeah. But I think
we've had a specific question kind of come in.
Shoot.
It's from Dan. And Dan has asked, how do you build a roadmap if you have leaders that are not planning in advance for their teams? What is your advice?
Oh, that is a good one.
That is a good question.
I think there's a case of looking historically in terms of what the roadmap has looked like previously and doing a bit of analysis in terms of where the changes might have been.
Yeah. And if you haven't had a roadmap previously, just looking back at the past year or two in terms of maybe trends that you've found in terms of jobs that need hiring for, or areas of high demand that you know within your business might be needed. Could
Yeah,
probably help.
agree. I think on the other side of it, it's really about kind of gaining as much information as you possibly can do. It might be a case that they're not planning for, let's take 2025, right? It might be a case that they don't see any need for headcount in 2025, but getting the hiring manager to look at the team that they have in place already and doing a bit of a percentage of, okay, flight risks, for example, or this person's coming up to a year in their career. We know that normally people start to leave at this point. Do you feel comfortable that they're progressing? Have they got clear avenues that they want to go down? Because then you can start to put kind of a behind the scenes roadmap in terms of, what if someone leaves? How are we going to plug the gap? Can we start creating these proactive talent pools that we're ready to dip into if and when we need it? I think, let's be honest, 2025 is going to be a really interesting time for a lot of companies. We've had a really rough 12 to 24 months in the biotech, pharma, just life sciences in general, where there have been loads of layoffs. Not everyone can look a year into the future. Some companies are thinking, do I have enough cash runway to get me through to the end of the year? But I think trying to stay on top of it, trying to reduce being reactive and being more proactive by looking back historically, but also looking in the future in terms of, what if this happens? How are we going to be proactive about it? Have we got the talent pools working?
Yeah.
And speaking to other talent acquisition and HR people in the market, see how they're doing it as well, because there's a lot of knowledge out there and everyone loves talking about the strategies they have in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also to add to that, with that specific question, if you're in an organization where the hiring might not be planned in advance, you've really got to, again, linking it to that open communication and that honesty, you've really got to be honest with those hiring managers and those leaders of your business. Say, look, I want to do my job to the best of my ability. I want to be able to support you and make the hiring as effective as possible. Completely understand if you don't have a clear idea as to the volume or what it might be that you're going to end up hiring for this year. But I guess initiating that conversation, opening that dialogue, you never know what those hiring managers or leaders might start filtering down to you once you sort of explain to them why you need that roadmap in place. I think that's probably a good place to start, because unless you've made the effort to open that communication, you don't know what information you're missing out on, because they might assume that you know it already, or they might assume that you've got it all covered, when actually you do need a bit of support so that you can support them. And then similarly to that, like all of our consultants will speak with hiring managers daily, not just for roles, but to understand the team functions, the morale, the collaboration that's going on with those individual teams. I think having those touch points with maybe the lower leveled hiring managers within your organization, not pushing them to tell you about the roles that they might need filling or things, but just to have that open communication again, will help when the time comes. Maybe you'll get a 2 months in advance instead of 2 weeks in advance next time, something like that. Anything small can make a really big difference. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I think finally on that, because a lot of people, when we're talking about talent roadmap, just look at like what the hiring needs to look like quarter on quarter, for example, but scale that back and look at what are the core business goals for the year. It might be a case that you have a funding goal that needs to be achieved by the end of Q1. Okay, well, if we achieve that funding goal, is that going to create a positive or a negative culture internally? How is that going to affect those that might be a little bit shaky and kind of new, to those that might be there for a little bit longer within the business? I think that's a really good way to look at it, whether it be conferences, whether it be, it really depends. Another thing a lot of people really forget, and in Europe, it's very much kind of March, April, May time, but bonus season is coming around. It's a really important time to be able to make sure, yes, you confirm your hires internally and kind of solidify what you've got in place, but you need to start planning, because they will be leaving and they normally leave quite quickly, especially if JP Morgan's, if that's positive in January, we start to see a really positive Q1, both in the US and in Europe. If elections happen obviously soon for the US, that can create a bit more positivity in terms of the economy. So there's a lot of factors that I think we need to keep an eye on that could trigger people to look at moving.
I think also with your years of experience, and probably quite similar to Dan who asked the question, is you've always got to trust your gut and your instincts, because you've been in the industry long enough to kind of see the cycle, see the pattern, and when you speak to people, you get that instant feeling whether they're maybe considering a move, or you can get the feeling that maybe the team's quite frustrated and that you're maybe going to need an extra 2 heads there or something like that. So just to really just have the confidence in yourself and trust your gut is really important as well.
Yeah. Thanks for the question though.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, really good one to start.
I hope we've answered it to a good standard.
Yeah. It's always a tough one. Where do we go now? That's the main thing.
Where do we go now? I think if you're a business that's worried about maybe taking up too much time to build this roadmap, at the end of the day, it has a really big effect on your business, the people you bring in. If you're going to reach those milestones, you need to have the correct people in the business to do so. So really taking the time to build the roadmap, even sitting down for a day where you can have all the key decision makers in a room and ask them as many questions as possible and run through those hypothetical scenarios is really important to do. And I think companies need to take more value in that.
Yeah, I think an offsite day is always really good in terms of taking everybody out. And I think a lot of people forget that if you are working with an external agency, for example, and it's the right type of external agency, ask them if they've got years of experience. I mean, we're selfless, but we've been around for 40 years. We know exactly where and when things are going to change and happen in the market. We've experienced it with stealth mode companies. We've experienced it with global pharmaceutical companies. We've got a lot of experience, even though we don't necessarily look like we do specifically, but within this building. So have an open, honest conversation with that type of agency and ask them how you'd be able to, one, implement a strategy, but what that strategy looks like, any problems that you've seen competitors facing, the situation of competitors, because the likelihood is that if I'm working with company A, I'm probably going to be working with company B just down the road as well at the same time. So having that open, honest, transparent conversation with the right talent partner externally to help you internally as well. And
before you even get to consulting an agency, I think it's really important to ask those questions in regards to, if you are part of an organization where there is a lot of forward thinking and there is a bit of a plan in terms of maybe mass hiring in one area, or that a leader in a really niche area is leaving and you need a replacement, for example, to set that out and to maybe separate it by department and geography. And then once you understand the needs in each geography and department, you can then put forward a plan. So, for example, if you're doing mass hiring, is your resources best placed by getting your TAs to actively source for it? Probably not. You're probably going to be looking at making sure that your job adverts and your presence on LinkedIn and the company website is so complete and really enticing to that large pool of candidates with the same skill set that you need to get in at a very particular time. So, for example, you'd probably be solely focusing on getting those applicants through the job adverts. Whereas if it is a biometrics role in some really remote location, you're probably going to have to then get someone in like ourselves who have the experience of filling those niche roles to help support you, because again, you've got your resources in other places, and as best as you can, you've planned for that at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and you've been able to budget for it, because that's a big, obviously, overhanging word at the moment in terms of what budgets look like, and everyone's been on kind of budget restrictions over the last God, 18, 24 months.
Feels like
So
forever.
it has felt a little bit like forever, but putting those budgets in place and putting in kind of max and min budgets for specific roles, and not just looking in terms of the finance, but looking in terms of the cost of not having a bum in that seat, I think is really important. And a lot of people forget about, yes, it might be a case that an agency is quite expensive to use, but actually how much is that, both in terms of financial cost internally within your business, but also in terms of workload, how much is that costing? If you need to fill a director level position that's been open for 2 months and the workload has gone to either another director or the team below, have they got too much workload? Are they now looking to leave? And all of a sudden, it's a bit like a kind of domino effect. Everybody starts kind of leaving and moving forward. So planning ahead, if you can, is important. And just on planning ahead, we're obviously talking about developing 2025 roadmap, easier for some, even if you kind of restrict that down to a quarter roadmap. I think that's really, really important, being affected.
Absolutely. I think there's we see it all the time where we kind of bang our heads against the wall as to why they're not making this higher, or why a role's been open for, say, I don't know, something ridiculous like 4 months on a website, and they've not seemingly hired it, but when we approach them, they don't want agency use. And I think fair enough if you don't have the budget for it, but having a roadmap in place will allow them to make a decision faster as to whether they can use someone like us and have the resources to use someone like us, or, you know, if they've tried that strategy and it's made a vacancy open for 4 months, then they can go to their B plan. You know, what is next in your plan if you can't fulfill it in the way that you've decided should be the first attempt. I think that's really important to plan for.
Yeah, agree. I think one thing that I'm interested in asking you specifically, because of obviously some of the work that you've been doing more recently, but also when you started off with working directly with companies on the full 360 side, is understanding where not only to access the talent, but looking kind of internally and upskilling as part of the roadmap, and then looking externally to bring someone in. Do you find that there's a lot of thought and conversations that go on with internal people in terms of whether they're looking at upskilling someone to bring in someone else?
Yeah, do you know what? Actually, great question, because it's been quite a contentious issue at the moment for a lot of large pharma who I'm talking to, especially in Europe. The TAs, obviously they have the bigger budget and they do have that foresight. So they are discussing strategy right now. When it comes to the upskilling and sort of the internal mobility of the company, you might be, say, example, a 60,000 person company, and there's most likely people in your organization that can do the role that you are hiring for already, and that might be looking for a change anyway. So instead of letting them leave your organization, that inward mobility to, you know, move across or move up into those positions where they do have that skill set is a really big issue at the moment. I think a lot of companies don't have the overview of the talent inside their organization, whether that be that upon onboarding they haven't stored all their information properly in terms of, I guess, original CV, or, you know, monthly or yearly reviews from their existing managers. They haven't got it in place, but, you know, the want to stop using an outside agency, or, you know, the TAs starting to look inside as well. It's really difficult for them to find that talent, but it does exist. So, you know, I don't have a solution to that, and I don't think a lot of the companies I speak to have a solution to that. But it is a really interesting issue at the moment that they're facing. The internal mobility piece.
Yeah, it's I think it's always been an interesting topic. I think it's more of it's difficult for the larger companies out there, definitely, and, you know, they'll go through internal job postings and potentially some people put themselves forward, but a little bit easier for smaller businesses, which is nice to see. And I think in terms of culture and giving the opportunity and progression, etc., it's good.
Do you think that smaller organizations find it easier to upskill their existing employees, or do you think that potentially that is an issue as well?
I think it's tough for them, because if you're a smaller business, let's say 50 people, and you have someone internally that's applied for, let's say they're a scientist and they've focused predominantly on preclinical work, and they're wanting to make a jump across into a junior business development position. Now, the likelihood is that they probably don't have the skill set to do that. But the fact that they're applying internally is because something's wrong in their current role. So they're wanting to move. And it's either, do you give them that opportunity to move internally, or do you say, no, unfortunately not, you don't fit the requirements, and end up losing that person? And then you have to backfill that one and find another commercial person. So that's one element that's really tough in order of kind of trying to create and keep a positive culture in a small business, which is, I mean, as we found ourselves, it's really tough. But on the flip side, and then again, right, trying to upskill people when there's 101 different things going on for a manager can be really tough. I think it's all about open communication and transparency, and speaking with that maybe hiring manager for that role to say, do you have the time to upskill? We think they'd be really great at X, Y, and Z, but they really lack in A, B, and C. And is that something that can be upskilled? Sometimes you need to push people out of a business and an organization for them to gain the right type of experience, and then to be able to bring them back in.
Do you have the resources to be able to put the energy and effort into upskilling the person as well?
I think in the long run, it's really good to do. Like it's the best way in order to build morale, to build a culture, to give commitment to people, and they do in turn show that back. But it's that nurturing, instead of someone coming in hitting the ground running, it might take 3, 6, 9 months before you start to see the fruit of that labor. But when you see it, you'll see some real positive energy. So
maybe then applying that to the talent roadmap to ensure that not only are you looking at volume, area, department needs, you're looking at maybe allocating some resources to allow for that upskilling, so that in turn, I guess, the internal mobility gets better as well. Heavy, but I think it's,
I agree completely. So I guess a little bit of a run through whilst we're at this point. So we kind of looked at the importance already of talent road mapping, a little bit in terms of aligning the talent strategy with the business goals and creating that communication with hiring managers, understanding what their needs are and how you're able to potentially go out into the market, looking at historical data and how you're building that. We looked again a little bit at kind of applying those insights from the hiring managers and how you're going about, whether it's a volume of talent, whether it's a niche search that they're needing, and what that looks like. So now I think for me, it's looking at how you're actually going to go about building that talent roadmap. You've gained all the information that you need. You've kind of got a little bit of an idea in terms of what it's got to look like. Do you want to kick things off? I mean, we've got here components of the roadmap specifically, and I guess the ideal start dates, etc.
So I think you've got all that information, like you've said. You need to then build a timeline. You need to take it from I guess, whatever your financial year or something perspective will be. You need to start, estimating your time to hire. So that I think, right, let's start again. The best thing to do is probably to work backwards. It's like, the date you need that person in. Let's look at the history of placements similar, or let's look at, your average time to hire and work backwards from there. What would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you gain that information from, again, historical data that you might have, but also there's so many resources out there at the moment outside of, an external agency. You can look at kind of group chats on LinkedIn, there's WhatsApp, there's Slack, etc. So you'd be able to throw in questions and ask, how long did it take you guys in order to hire this type of person? But again, looking back at our previous webinars that we've done, you've got to make sure that your hiring strategy in terms of what your hiring process looks like is nailed down in order to confirm what these timelines look like, because different positions require, more interviews. Maybe they need to do a technical test. Maybe they don't need to be on site compared to doing all the interview online. Maybe it's an assessment day because it's more of a blue collar worker and you can get mass amount of them in.
And also, I guess you've got to understand the level of that hire.
Mm.
You know, typically your VPC level candidates take historically longer, although we have ourselves done some very fast, good, high quality searches for those types of candidates. I would say, you know, with notice periods also taken into consideration, you're probably looking at maybe 6 months until they can start at some of them.
Yeah, I think in Europe that's probably on the quicker end.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think I've seen them be involved in ones where it's taken like a year and a half to
Yeah.
get the right person through the door, and that's looking at canvassing and confidential searches and meeting shareholders, meeting board members, advisors, etc. So it really depends. US, which is a lot quicker, which is really nice to see, but again, that can take 2, 4, 6 months really to bring in the right type of person in. Availability at the top is harder compared to if you're, you know, looking at associate level, you can get hired done within 2 weeks and be really confident in terms of what that person is going to bring to the table. And
I guess if you're not so sure yet and you're in an organization where you don't have that oversight and something crops up where you need a CEO or something, then maybe exploring the option of, you know, can it be on a consultant basis? Can it be someone who can come in and implement change, but maybe not be part of the business forever?
Yeah.
And can they also then, based off that work, help put something in place for you to find that person in, I guess, a more suitable amount of time for you?
Definitely. Yeah, there's more people within consultancies at the moment that have years and years of experience, and in large pharma, small medical device companies that are a really good resource to use. And again, if you haven't been able to be proactive in terms of the strategy and you're having to be reactive, they are a really good place to go first. They give you kind of peace of mind, someone that's not got strings attached to the business and to the role. So definitely worth looking into. Really good point. That wasn't one of the ones I was thinking of.
Thank you. What about, so I guess moving down from the VPC level?
Yeah.
What would you advise, you know, our clients or whoever is listening to this to do when building their roadmap for the, I guess, more mid-level senior hires? How would you advise them to do that?
With that, I think, again, go back to our last webinar. I think it's looking at what's happened within the industry potentially. I think it really depends where you're hiring from. The US at the moment, for example, there's a lot of people at that kind of mid-level layer that have unfortunately had to go through restructuring and losing their jobs. So there is some available candidates out there at the moment, which means that you can speed up the process that you have in place. But if you're really trying to identify those types of people where it's an active headhunt, you're going to have to wine and dine them for a little bit first, definitely.
A little bit schmoozing,
which kind of extends the timeline for sure. But again, I think it depends on your process, and it depends really what you're looking for. If you're looking for, and you're really specific, and the kind of message from the hiring manager is very much I need someone with a PhD and 12 years of experience, with 3 of those years only really being academic, and they've got to have oncology and, you know, and they list off everything that they need, you're going to have to extend your timeline.
Yeah.
Massively.
Unless there's wiggle room.
Which is why it's really key to have that clear communication and to educate managers as well. And it's why building a hiring strategy for the year early allows you to get insightful information that you can then have an open, honest conversation with the hiring manager to say, you know what, I'm really sorry, but what you're looking for there doesn't exist, or there's only 30 people in the US that have that experience, and all of them are too expensive, or they have massive share options currently in their business, so we won't be able to afford to bring them across.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having, if you link that to the talent roadmap again, having something in place where, say, if you're expecting that type of hire and you've allocated the resource for your TA team to actively source it, then you can make sure that they're building candidate pools right from the beginning of the year. You know, that's not their only function, but they're starting to do that so that when it gets to that time, if they need to change what they've allocated in their roadmap or in terms of resource or timings, that they can do that more effectively. I think keeping in the spirit of the transparency, being able to feed back to your hiring managers throughout the year. Like, I know that this is probably coming up. We've said around August, it's now May. This is what I'm seeing at the moment. And you can then start to maybe even go further to advise those hiring managers, like, we need to start the search now. We need to free you up for interviews now, because this is what I'm seeing in the talent pools I've already created off the back of our strategy meeting on the roadmap.
Absolutely. And depending on the geography. So like summer is such a great example. In Europe, it seems everyone shuts down. They go off on holiday, they have a really great time.
It's great.
So if you're wanting to hire someone for September, you're really going to have to start looking at kind of the process starting with notice periods of people being out of office. You're going to need to kind of nail someone down in April, May time, really, which seems so far ahead. But if you've got the right strategy in place, you're probably looking at, March, April time in terms of
starting to give that feedback.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
To really open the communication there for that role.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
And there's other factors that influence kind of the hiring timelines. I mean, we've spoken about geographies.
We've touched upon notice periods.
A little bit on notice periods.
That's
We've talked about how niche the roles can be as well. Again, if there's only 5 or 6 people in a whole country that do that, you might need to look externally to different geographies. While merging 2 and 1 here, and which requires then kind of the thought process of, well, how are we relocating someone across? Have they got the right type of visa in order to work in this country? What are the family doing? Do we need to support their partner in terms of finding a job? Do we need to help their family and kids potentially finding schools? That then extends the time period of trying to get someone on board. So yeah, building that strategy nice and early is so key to avoid any of those last minutes. Difficult.
And what are your thoughts on, say, the employer value proposition? Do you think that it's really important to have that in a roadmap as well, in terms of, starting to plan for maybe roles that need a higher level of proposition?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, another thing a lot of companies miss is working closely with marketing, for example, when they're going through these roadmaps, because if you're looking to, let's say Q3 is the target time for you to be able to bring on 35 manufacturing operators in a specific location. Well, actually, how do we at the beginning of Q2 start to feed information onto the market, whether it be through LinkedIn, job boards, down at your local post office and putting a pin in it, right? There's little things. Yeah, exactly. It's utilizing that time period and working with marketing in order to try and gain and drum as much attention as possible, so that you're either going to gain more inbound applicants, or as the market is starting to flip already, you're able to have conversations with people on an active headhunt basis, but they already know more about your company. They really like the idea and they've heard great things. And it's just by consistent advertising and working with marketing on what your brand looks like. And with that, your kind of EVP.
Yeah, you need to ensure that what you're offering is, I guess, competitive with your employers, with your competitors as well, and to make it more of an incentive to want to apply and then to want to work there. So yeah, getting that or drip feeding that information onto, I guess, LinkedIn or whatever it might be that you're using is really important.
And also on that, the talent acquisition or HR or hiring manager's brand into the market. I guess we don't talk about that too much, but companies that have been really effective that we've worked with, we've done a bit of kind of a piece on who the hiring manager is, a little bit of a background on them, why they joined the business. Throwing that into the market really helps you to gain attraction and attention, which is really key to kind of differentiate yourself to all the other competitors out there, because you might not pay the most amount, you may not be as advanced in terms of the therapeutic area, or it might not be as exciting of an area for people to want to work in. But if you create an image around yourself which is positive, exciting, it really does help to drum up the right type of attention. Yeah,
and creating that image is, I mean, for me personally, it's a bit scary, but it's something that I know the value of and I need to, I guess, do more. So I think encouraging everyone to do more of it is probably a good idea as well, just to add to it.
Just to add.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, and I think lastly, I think what we touched on earlier was in terms of prioritizing the needs and building that roadmap. It's also been honest and open and realizing where you might require external support and what can be managed in-house. I think it's really important to nail that nice and early, because you can plan for the budget, but also you can start to make sure that you're utilizing the right type of agency. You don't want to work with a generalist, unfortunately. You want to work with someone that's very niche and understands exactly what's happening in the market, so that you know that your cash, your dollars, your euros, your TRIF, whatever you're paying in, is being sent to the right person that's able to represent you on the market effectively, but also brings the right type of technical expertise that you're looking for to fill those niche roles or those difficult to find people.
Absolutely. And I think you want to work, if you are going to work with an agency, for example, you probably need to really establish that communication with them early as well, just to ensure that actually, yes, you've allocated the agency resource for these roles, but again, linking it to the timeline, you need to make sure that that working relationship is not going to, I guess, mess up the timeline in any way. And it needs to be as effective as and efficient as possible. So I think really viewing that agency as a partner, not a service, is really helpful in making that happen as well.
Yeah.
But that again takes time and that takes planning. So you should probably put it on your roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think we've covered. I feel like we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
I think there is something that, just hopping back, as a little bit of a shameless plug. We here at SEC, we do have a lot of resources dedicated to helping companies plan their roadmap and establish that roadmap. And if we're linking it back to our discussion on upskilling or internal mobility, where there are those skills gaps, we do have resources such as a skills gap analysis that we can provide for you and help as much as we can. Even if you're not using us as an agency, we're more than happy to share it with you. I think that's really important to say. But other than that, I think we've covered a lot. I don't know. Can you think of anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm roadmaps out at this point.
We've driven along the road.
Yeah, we've driven along. We're all good. I guess any questions?
So we've got one question, and we're trying to scale, so haven't been focused on upskilling. How can I get our leaders more interested in the prospect of upskilling?
I feel like, Jacob, this is very much in your remit here.
Why are you throwing this one to me?
Because you love scaling businesses and you have a lot of experience in doing so. So I'm going to send that to you.
So we're trying to scale, but there hasn't been a focus on upskilling. Have I heard that correctly?
Yes. So they said that they are focused on scaling, but haven't been focused on upskilling internally. How can they make their leaders more interested in that prospect?
Sure. I think it really depends on, one, you've got to look at the timelines that you have in place. I think that's really important, first of all, because let's say, for example, you've been looking to scale up your business and it's been 2 months, 3 months that you've been trying to scale, but you haven't found the right type of person. And there's opportunity internally to move someone from one division to another and upskill them in that sector. I think being honest and open in terms of the data around it. There's a lot of companies that, as they try to scale, they think that they can scale in a certain area, but actually they lack either the experience, the skill, or the ability to do that. And actually going down that upskilling route is really, really important. In terms of gaining the hiring manager's attention about upskilling versus looking externally, it really sits down to what the hiring manager holds as valuable to them, and really how they sit and what their team needs to look like. A lot of the time, I think people forget that, especially with hiring managers, they're always looking at one externally to see what exciting talent there is out onto the market that they could bring in to create an A-star team. But I think a lot of the time it's because they don't know what is internal. They're so focused on their day-to-day job that they might be missing people within different divisions or different areas, and being able to sit people down. And again, I think we're in an age where there's so much tech going around, and there's less face time that's happening, which is so important. And actually being able to maybe sit down someone internally that does need upskilling and sitting them down with a hiring manager of a different division, having an open conversation about what the role entails, where their kind of skills are really positive and could affect the team versus where they're really negative and need, you know, support on is a really good way and a really good exercise as well. And as a TA, HR, anyone that's involved in the hiring process, to be able to sit in that meeting and understand as well how the hiring manager is sending it across and what skills that they're talking about that they're lacking is a good exercise.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's quite mutually beneficial to, I guess, educate your leaders and hiring managers in terms of, you know, there are different ways to scale up, and part of that scaling process might be having to shift people into different departments, and potentially, I mean, I don't know if this is the exact scenario they're facing, but potentially there's someone in one department who would fit really well in where they're really trying to scale, but actually the person who's moving's role is an easier one to fill. And you could find someone to do that job at that standard as well. So maybe positioning it to your leaders that actually the shift and the upskilling is only benefiting them in the long run as they do go to scale. I think you spoke about it earlier when, you know, if you allow your employees to make the move for whatever reason, whether they were unhappy or the workload, whatever it might be, to upskill into an area they're really interested in, you've got that commitment from them. And so with a scaling business, I think retention rate is quite important, isn't it?
Definitely.
Know, you need to make sure you've got the people who want to be part of the business and help it grow. So really taking the time to sit down with those leaders and explain the benefits of the upskilling and the internal mobility piece is probably, and phrasing it in a mutually beneficial way is probably going to be your solution there, I think.
Yeah, I think data is a really core thing that a lot of people forget to do. And again, not necessarily just your own internal data in terms of how difficult it's been, but utilizing, again, an agency, looking at how many people are there effectively in the market at the moment, how many of those are open versus passive, and being able to educate the hiring manager on actually it might be better to upskill someone internally because we've tried this scaling process externally, and unfortunately, you know, there's a lack of candidates with the right experience, or your expectations are too high. However, we've got someone here who fits 7 out of 10 of kind of the boxes, they tick them. But actually, how do we upskill those effectively? And by the way, this person's been with us for quite a while. They know the culture, they know the business, they're more enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, and really evaluating it on an individual basis, I guess. You need to really evaluate whether that individual has maybe too much upskilling needed, or actually if it's maybe not that much and only a short amount of learning time before they're up to the standard that they need for that specific role. And having that overall evaluation on a case-by-case basis is probably going to be more of an incentive for the leaders to make a decision on actually whether to allow them to move across or move up or whatever it might be as well.
Yeah, I'd love to take that question offline with the person as
well.
Same.
Just run through it.
Well, we've got one more question, and this person's also asked if they could discuss it offline afterwards.
Sure.
But do either of you have any examples of what companies have done to market their hiring managers? So
yes,
yeah,
we do.
Yeah, we do.
We've got a lot. Yeah, and I think the key thing is identifying what level that hiring manager is and kind of what you're trying to put out into the market. But yeah, absolutely, we've got experience with that, and I guess it's more something we can take it offline because it's a case-by-case basis, really. It comes down to seniority, it comes down to the area of focus. Are they tech ops? Are they biometrics? Are they preclinical? Are they
what they've already
R&D?
got out there on the market themselves and what boost they might need?
Yeah, and understanding what's really effective and what's really poor as well, because there's a few companies that you look and you're like, why on earth have you waxed that out onto the market? That's having more of a negative effect than a positive effect. But yeah,
and it might be that, you know, for example, we'd be able to give some insight into the overall company, I guess, perception on the market as well, and how that might be affecting your hiring manager marketing.
Definitely. I mean, we've done it for lots of companies in terms of that NPS score, so we're able to kind of analyze how candidates view them on the market, and then put in strategies to kind of increase the awareness or the positive reaction that people potentially have. So there's a lot we can do, but it's, I think, again, another massive topic to be talked about.
Great, so that's all the questions.
Nice.
We'll circle back on some of the answers with the specific participants, but if you guys have got nothing else to say, then
Yeah.
All good. Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Hope
Yes.
it's been informative. And I've enjoyed this conversation. So
Yeah, always a pleasure. Maybe we'll get you on for the next one as well.
I mean, yeah,
Who
let's
knows?
see.
Cool. Well, good luck with the roadmap strategies.
Yeah.
I guess hopefully the information has been helpful, and likewise, if there's anything that you need, whether it be roadmap, whether it be hiring, or just a chit chat about the market, by all means, let us know. More than willing to have a conversation.
Always.
Cool. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, Jacob. I feel like I'm using water.